Welcome to the Aversio Experience, the podcast where functional mushrooms meet real life, real science, and real people who are ready to feel better than they ever thought possible. I'm Brandy Garden. I'm the co-founder here at Aversio Wellness, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Dr. Desiree Caruso, naturopathic physician.
Hi, everyone. Mushrooms are symbols of interconnectedness. And every episode, we are here to connect you with the health, the wisdom, and the science that fungi have brought us on our own journey to this moment. We believe functional mushrooms are critical to the maintenance of our physical well-being, our mental clarity, and our collective vitality. These organisms have sustained life on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. And it turns out they have a lot to offer us too.
Yes, and our ancestors knew this. They had deep, intuitive, cultural connections to mushrooms long before modern science caught up. And yet today, in a world where we should know better, fungi remain understudied, undervalued, and wildly misunderstood. And that is exactly why we're here, because Aversio means change, and it's our mission to change lives through fungi.
There's a mushroom for every moment.
And we're so glad that you are here to share this one with us. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Aversio Experience. I'm Brandy Garden. I'm the co-founder here at Aversio Wellness.
And I'm Dr. Desiree Caruso, naturopathic physician. Welcome to part 2 of the skin series, because today we're talking about eczema.
Yes, and if you listened to part 1 of this series, you know that we teased which mushroom we'd be talking about. And the mushroom taking the lead this time is
a completely different condition, a completely different mushroom, and honestly, a completely different immune story, which I think is going to surprise some people.
Yes. So we talked all about psoriasis and chaga in the last episode. So if you missed it and psoriasis is affecting somebody in your life or even you, go back and listen to that one. But let's set the scene again, the way that we did last time in that episode. So I want you to picture someone this time waking up at 2 a.m. because the itching on the inside of their elbow finally won the fight against their sleep. This is not a mild itch. It's the kind that makes you consider for one irrational second if scratching until it bleeds might actually be worth it. Picture a parent standing in the bath aisle at midnight of the drugstore that, thank goodness, it's open 24 hours, Googling eczema baby cream. I have friends that went through this for the 4th different brand this month that they're trying because nothing has actually worked yet. And the pediatrician appointment isn't for another 6 months because that's the reality of healthcare right now. Or picture somebody avoiding things like wool sweaters, certain laundry detergents, taking a hot shower, any stress, not because they're being precious about it, but because they have learned the hard way that any one of those things can set off a flare that literally will take weeks to calm down.
If that sounds familiar, like it does for me, this episode is for you. And I do want to start by clearing up something that people misunderstand about eczema. Eczema gets treated like a catch-all label for irritated skin. Almost a cosmetic annoyance, but it isn't that. It also is an immune condition that has specific well-mapped mechanisms behind it.
Yeah. So break that down for us, Dr. Desiree, because I think a lot of people, myself included, before this show, assumed this was more of a vague irritation than an actual mapped out immune process. Because as someone with psoriasis, when people would say they had eczema, I would be like, lucky you, right? It's not an autoimmune disease. It didn't have this same understanding for me, but I'm learning.
Well, so it can be, an irritation and a response to cosmetics and certain things, but there is also an immune process behind it and a well understood pathway at this point. Eczema, also known as atopic dermatitis, is related to the Th2 immune circuit. So Th2 immune cells, these are T helper cells, and the key players are specific cytokines. These are cellular messengers, IL-4, interleukin-4, interleukin-13, and one called IL-31, which is directly responsible for that irritating itch signal.
Yeah, so it's not just irritated skin. It is a full immune system conversation happening underneath.
And it's a completely different conversation because in eczema, something damages that skin barrier. So that could be a genetic vulnerability. Sometimes it can be an environmental irritant like I talked about. Sometimes it's both. And so immune cells will respond by releasing these specific interleukins, IL-4 and IL-13. And these two cytokines do something specific. So what they're doing is they're suppressing a protein called filaggrin, which is essential for keeping the skin barrier intact as well as properly hydrated.
So less filaggrin means a leakier barrier?
Exactly. So a leakier barrier lets more irritants and allergens in, which can then trigger more immune activation, which can then suppress more filaggrin. So it becomes a self-sustaining feed-forward loop, just like we talked about with psoriasis.
Yeah, the body's so interesting. And the itch specifically, where does that come from, that feeling?
So it comes from interleukin 31. That's where it comes in. And it's interesting because IL-31 acts almost directly on the nerve endings in the skin, which is essentially sending an itch signal straight to the brain. There's also a related molecule called IL-33, and it's released when skin cells are damaged, which is, in eczema, atopic dermatitis, and that amplifies the whole Th2 response, and that can make the itching worse. Researchers actually call it the itch-scratch cycle for a reason. The itching causes scratching, and the scratching causes more skin damage, and then the damage releases more of those alarm signals, which causes more itching.
So the itching isn't just a symptom then. It's actually part of what is driving the condition forward.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's part of why eczema can feel so relentless, because you're not just managing a rash. You're managing this physiological loop that your own scratching reflex keeps feeding, and then it becomes habitual. Yeah. And you have to break that habit as well.
Yeah. So there's something else that I've heard you mention before, this idea that eczema doesn't always stay just eczema.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the more important things, I think, for parents especially to understand. Researchers have been tracking large groups of children and with eczema and found this predictable pattern. Eczema will tend to show up first, and it can often be, 4 months of age. I've seen it even earlier in practice, and it's followed by food allergies and even asthma, right? Around 13 months or even, in adolescence or even as a kid. And then that can present as allergic rhinitis or hay fever around 2 years old. So it's all of these constellations of things that are related.
Yeah, amazing. So it's not that these conditions are unrelated. They're actually connected, and it's eczema that tends to be the first in like the dominoes.
Right. That's the working theory. And the biological logic behind it is, so remember that leaky skin barrier that we talked about. A damaged barrier doesn't just let in irritants, it can let in allergens too. So dust, pollen, food proteins from the environment, all of which get exposed to the immune system through the skin rather than through digestion, which seems to promote this allergic sensitization rather than tolerance. So these studies are estimating that up to 75% of children with severe eczema may go on to develop asthma, and then 30 to 50% may develop food allergies.
Wow, that is a significant number of kids out there.
It is. And I think it's why addressing the skin barrier early and consistently isn't just about comfort in the moment. There is a real research case for it mattering for a child's broader immune trajectory. And it isn't fear-mongering. It's one more reason this deserves attention rather than being treated as this cosmetic annoyance.
Yeah. So how common is it then?
It's very common, and it skews young. So research puts prevalence around 25% of children and somewhere between 3 to 10% of adults, depending on the study and the population. There are a lot of kids that do grow out of it, or it becomes much milder by adulthood, but there is a meaningful number of people that it persists or even shows up for the first time as an adult, and that was me.
Yeah. And so genetics plays a role too, you mentioned?
They do. So somewhere between 10 to 30% of people with eczema already have this identifiable mutation in the filaggrin gene itself. Meaning that their skin barrier was already working with, less structural support before any trigger even showed up. But genetics, as we know, aren't the whole story, which is important because it means that there are environmental impacts, and your daily choices also matter. It's not just, the hand that you were dealt with genetics.
Yeah. Okay, so can we do the same thing we did with the last episode where you walk through the fact that this isn't just one condition? And we've been friends a long time. So I knew you as a child with asthma. So interesting to put the two things together, that there's this connection. So yeah, walk through. It's not just one thing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's important. So what most people mean when they say eczema is atopic dermatitis, specifically the type that we've been describing, and it is the most common. But eczema is really like this umbrella term that's covering several distinct conditions. So there's contact dermatitis, which happens when the skin reacts to something it touched directly or is in contact with. So an irritant. There's dyshydrotic eczema, where there are small itchy blisters that show up specifically on the hands and the feet. There's nummular eczema, which causes coin-shaped patches. And this tends to show up in people who had atopic dermatitis earlier in life. And then there's seborrheic dermatitis, it shows up in the oil gland rich areas like the scalp and the face.
So someone could have one of these other types and not realize that it falls under that same broad eczema umbrella.
Yeah, and it matters because of the immune mechanism that we've discussed with Th2, IL-4, IL-13 in that story. That's specifically the atopic dermatitis pathway. Like if we look at contact dermatitis, for instance, where if your skin comes in contact with something and that causes that reaction, that's more on the direct irritant and the allergic response rather than that more systemic pathway. So this is where getting that diagnosis, the right diagnosis, can change both the treatment plan and how much a systemic approach like reishi or other things is actually relevant to what's going on.
Yeah. And can we talk about something else too? Because I think there is a piece of this that doesn't get said enough. Sometimes eczema looking skin isn't really about the skin at all.
This is my favorite point. And it is one of the reasons that I became a naturopathic doctor rather than just looking at a finite or very small lens, because we are looking at the whole person. And, when we think of skin is downstream of a lot of other symptoms. So when someone has a rash that looks exactly like textbook eczema, but it isn't responding the way that it should, or it showed up out of nowhere as an adult with no childhood history of eczema, that is worth a deeper look rather than just another tube of cream or topical that you apply.
Yes, absolutely. The Band-Aids aren't going to do it. So what kinds of things would a deeper look actually turn up then?
So as we know, it varies person to person, but there are specific categories that come up with clear patterns. And I see this in practice a lot. I treat a lot of eczema in practice. And it's kind of funny because sometimes the things that you experience are the ones that draw people in to you.
Yeah.
Food sensitivities and gut dysbiosis, which we've talked about before, are a big factor for people. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the root cause, but it can be a trigger that can keep you in that loop. There's also nutrient deficiencies like zinc, essential fatty acids, which the skin barrier depends on. There's also thyroid dysfunction, which shows up on the skin more than people actually would expect. Environmental exposures, mold being one of them, that's backed by research. I've experienced that. We'll talk about that. And when you look at these multiple large studies, there's this 2024 meta-analysis covering over 3 decades of research. They found that children living in homes that were damp or had mold exposure had a measurably higher risk of developing eczema along with asthma as well as allergic rhinitis. So that's just an example of all these different things that maybe you wouldn't even think are connected to it, but actually are a big part of it.
Yeah. So it's not just an anecdote. There is real data connecting the environment that somebody lives in to whether or not they develop this.
And this isn't just for eczema too. Like even in our part 1, when we talked about psoriasis, there are triggers. And this could be a trigger for somebody, right? So I want to connect this to something that we talked about earlier, where we described it as usually starting with eczema and then, could be moving toward asthma. But that underlying predisposition, which is called atopy, it doesn't actually care about order. So it doesn't have to be if you already have eczema or you have a family history, you're carrying that, Th2 skewed immune tendency that tends to make eczema more likely to. Regardless of which condition technically showed up first on paper, but there is a connection.
Yeah. So the asthma isn't the cause exactly. It's more like a marker that someone's immune system already leans a certain way.
That is a great way to put it. Yeah. And it's also part of my own story as well, too, because I had childhood asthma and I never had any eczema. There was never anything there. For me, it was a trigger. Just like you with stress and other things going on in your life being a trigger for your psoriasis, for me, the stress in my body was mold and living in an environment where I was breathing in mold spores in a home that unbeknownst to me had mold in it. And I was breathing that in every day for 4 years. And this is where I think a lot of people can relate with autoimmune conditions or even just their health when it totally, all of a sudden one day just hits them. It's these small changes every day that we're being impacted. So for me, I noticed, I can't eat certain things anymore. I have this immune response and reaction and my skin is getting worse. It was nuts and it was certain things with, that would induce histamine. And it was just very new for me, because I had a very flexible gut and metabolism. And then that led to more shifts within my gut health, like bloating and this and that. And then just all of a sudden, it was like one day my body just couldn't handle the load of that anymore. And it showed up on my skin and particularly on my face and my hands and these areas. So, it's hard, right? We talked about this in the psoriasis episode too. It's people see that. And they see that you don't look well and they try and offer all of these things and they don't understand why you can't eat certain things or why you're avoiding and, taking out all the chemicals and toxins in your environment, like changing your laundry detergent. When you go and get your nails done, you're not getting the nail polish with the acrylates in it because you're going to have a skin flare, all of these things that impact you. So it's all encompassing and there usually is a trigger and sometimes we don't see it right away. Sometimes we have to think back and dig a little bit deeper.
Yes. Thank goodness for journaling. So many people I've talked to recently are able to go back and read years back journals and identify the point that they knew something was happening. Those whispers were there and, we weren't ready to look at it yet. But thank you so much for sharing that personal story. I think what strikes me every time we do this is how much of the experience is invisible to everyone except the person living it, because I was beside you while you were going through that. And I mean, if you go back, if you've been in our Versio community for a few years, if you go back and watch some of our first episodes, you can actually see Dr. Desiree's skin not being happy. And she showed up anyway. And I was actually oblivious to much of it because she didn't allow it to affect her day-to-day life on the outside. But to look back and know that she was managing it on the inside, just, it just really speaks to your character and that you didn't give up on yourself and that you're here on the other side of it is the best part of the story. Both of us get to be here and celebrate great skin together and not the expectation that, we might not see something show up on our skin, but that when it does, it's just our body talking to us. And that's a gift, not something that's going to hinder us from going where we are planning to go. So I love it. I love how much of the experience is detective work and that it can take that kind of detective work to actually find the root of what you're managing.
Yeah, that detective work really matters. And I don't want anyone listening here to think like, go find the deeper cause and feel overwhelmed and feel like this diagnosis is their fault or that they didn't look hard enough, because it's hard. And most people with eczema have straightforward atopic dermatitis and they respond well to the standard barrier support and trigger management, which is most of what we are covering today. But for the smaller group of people where nothing quite adds up, where treatment isn't working the way it should, it is worth knowing that the skin is often the last place that a deeper imbalance shows up, not necessarily the first.
Yeah. And that distinction does matter a lot because most people, standard approach, a smaller group, dig deeper.
Yeah, exactly that balance. And I want to put some numbers behind the day-to-day experience because I don't think people realize how much this affects daily functioning and sleep especially. So if you're listening and maybe this is you know exactly what I'm going to say. And if this is somebody that you love, this is great information for you. So research from the American Academy of Pediatrics found that between 50 and 80% of children with atopic dermatitis experience sleep disturbances. And that number climbs even higher during active flares. I can totally remember it. And this isn't a minor inconvenience. There's a widely cited review in the British Journal of Dermatology, and they found that the quality of life impact on childhood eczema is equal to or greater than any other major chronic childhood condition, including asthma and including diabetes.
Reframes it completely. This isn't just a skin thing by any measure.
No, it really isn't. And it doesn't stop with the child. Studies have found that a child's disruptive sleep is directly correlated with higher levels of anxiety and depression in their parents. It becomes this whole household experience, not an individual one. Like when you're waking up in the middle of the night itching like crazy, it drives you nuts.
Yeah, and that explains the image I described at the beginning of the episode, that parent standing, in that bath aisle, in that supplement aisle, the cream aisle at midnight, willing to do anything.
Yeah, and parents feel overwhelmed and helpless. And that image is backed by real data too, unfortunately.
Yeah. And those triggers, they vary enormously person to person, which is part of what makes eczema so frustrating to manage.
Yeah, they do, because common ones include harsh soaps and detergents. We've talked about like cosmetics and things and ingredients before on the podcast. Certain fabrics like wool, extreme temperatures, even sweating, stress, of course, and specific food sensitivities in some people. And it's particularly in children, but sometimes in adults as well. So identifying your own personal trigger map matters more than a lot of other things that we could give you. That pattern recognition is so important.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into my favorite part.
Yeah.
Where does reishi come into this? Let's talk about the mushroom. So I have to say, going into this episode, I did not expect reishi to be the mushroom for eczema, because I think of it as, it's my herbal yoga, it's sleep, and it's the one for stress. So where does it come in?
Yeah, reishi, it does double duty here, because when you understand the mechanism, it does make sense. But also one thing before we get into it, I want to take us somewhere first, because reishi is one of the richest folklore stories of any mushroom that we talk about on this podcast. And I do love telling it.
Please go for it. Let's do it. Okay, everyone, real talk here for a second. Reishi is the one product in our whole lineup that both Dr. Desiree and I take without fail every single night. And not because we have to, because we really notice when we don't.
Oh yeah, and it is not subtle. It is the difference between lying in bed running through tomorrow's to-do list and actually feeling your body downshift.
Yes, that is exactly it. It's not a sedative. It doesn't knock you out. It just lets you land.
Yeah, and that's because of what's actually happening biologically. Reishi's calming effect comes down to compounds called triterpenes, specifically ganoderic acids that are unique to reishi. They're part of what's been studied for supporting the body's stress response system. You've heard of us say the HPA axis, and for helping the nervous system come down out of that wired, tight-chested state that a lot of us live in by default.
Which, if you're anything like me, can be most of the day, some days.
Yeah, it's most people's, but here's the part that nobody talks about. Those triterpenes are alcohol soluble. They're not water soluble. So a reishi tea or a hot water only extract is never going to give you meaningful levels of them. It'll give you beta glucans, which have their own awesome value, but you'll miss the exact compounds that are responsible for the calming effect that you're actually looking for.
Yeah, and this is why our reishi capsules are a 15-to-1 dual extract. That's super concentrated. They are hot water and alcohol extracted so that you're getting both the beta glucans and those triterpenes from the whole fruiting body. No mycelium grown on grain and always organic certified.
And the dose matters just as much as the extraction does. One capsule delivers 3,750 milligrams quantity crude equivalent. That is a real clinically relevant amount. It's not a sprinkle.
Yeah, no pixie dusting over here. And for me, it shows up first thing in the morning. I wake up and I don't have that heavy, dragging feeling, even on the nights that I didn't get a full 8 hours of sleep.
That is a really common early marker that people report. It's that shift from waking up tired to waking up feeling restored. It's one of the reasons that reishi tends to convert people into long-term mushroom nerds faster than almost anything else in this category.
Yes, so if your nervous system has forgotten what it feels like to actually settle, Or if you are lying awake, replaying your day at 11 o'clock at night, this is worth trying.
You can start with just one capsule about 30 to 60 minutes before bed and give it a couple of weeks because this is nervous system retraining. It's not just a light switch.
Yeah, so head on over to aversiowellness.com and you can use code podcast15 for 15% off any order anytime. So that's podcast15 right at checkout.
There's a mushroom for every moment. And tonight, it might just be this one. Back to the show. Okay, so reishi, which is scientifically known as Ganoderma lucidum, also known as lingzhi in China, it's been used for over 2,000 years, with some archaeological evidence suggesting that even earlier use, going back thousands of years into Neolithic China. It was classified in the oldest Chinese pharmacopoeias as a superior herb, meaning that it was believed you could take it long-term, not just during an illness, to support the whole body. And I think we do take that for the whole body.
Yeah.
The name lingzhi translates to something like herb of spiritual potency. It was associated with longevity, vitality, and what the tradition calls qi or life force. And for a long time, it was so rare in the wild that nobody could access it, which only added to its mythology.
Yes. The mushroom of immortality is how I think of it.
Exactly the nickname it earned in both China and Japan. Traditionally, it was used to calm the mind, ease the spirit, and support the body through insomnia, chest tightness, and general fatigue. It wasn't historically prescribed for a condition called eczema specifically, since again, that is a modern medical classification, but calming an overactive, agitated system is pretty close to a description of traditional reishi use, as you'll find. And that idea turns out to map onto the actual immunology in an interesting way.
Okay, so walk us into the modern research then. What is reishi actually doing at that compound level?
The compounds that mattered here are the triterpenes, specifically ganoderic acids, which is unique to reishi. And that's also what gives reishi its very distinct bitter taste. So if it is quite bitter, that means that's the good stuff in there. So there's research going back decades on this too. So studies isolated a specific compound, ganoderic acid C, and they found that it was responsible for much of reishi's anti-inflammatory activity. And it was tested directly against histamine release from mast cells.
Mast cells being the cells that release histamine during an allergic or a itch response.
Exactly. So the cells at the center of that Th2 IL-31 itch story that we just walked through. Multiple studies going back to the 1980s found that compounds isolated from reishi, including these specific ganoderic acids and triterpenes, they meaningfully inhibited histamine release from mast cells in these models. And one small case account even described longtime hay fever sufferers whose itching and sneezing improved noticeably within just days of starting reishi supplementation.
That's such a direct line back to that itch scratch cycle that you described earlier. So cool.
Yeah, it is. And more recent research has also broadened that picture too. So there's a systemic review and meta-analysis of reishi's triterpenes that was actually published this year, pulling together over 20 studies, and they found consistent reductions in key inflammatory markers. So TNF-alpha, that's yours, interleukin-6, nitric oxide, largely through the effects on the same inflammatory signaling pathways that are involved in conditions like eczema.
Yeah, so it's not one isolated finding. Again, it's this body of research pointing all in the same direction.
Yeah, that is a fair way to put it, because you have mast cell and histamine modulation on one side and broader anti-inflammatory cytokine calming effects on the other. But both of those map directly onto what's happening in an eczema flare.
Yeah, and reishi is also famous for being an adaptogen. Whole episodes on that if you want to go and find them. But I think that really matters here too, given how much you said stress can be a trigger.
Yeah, for sure. Stress for eczema, but also other conditions. So it's such an important connection. You know, reishi doesn't just suppress the immune system or stimulate it. It's studied as an immune modulator. We say that all the time, meaning that it appears to help bring an overactive immune response down and support an underactive one up, depending on what that body needs or your body needs. So combine that with its traditional and researched role in supporting the stress response as well as sleep, And then you also have a mushroom that's addressing some of the trigger, addressing the stress, which is a trigger, and a piece of that mechanism like mast cell and cytokine activity, which, can be part of that loop and cause at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, I have to ask because we did a whole segment on this last episode. What about the gut? Where
I was
does the gut?
hoping
I
you
know
would
it's going to
ask.
come in. I know it's coming in.
Yeah. Well, okay. So eczema's gut connection is actually some of the most well-established gut skin research that exists for any skin condition. And the concept of gut skin axis, like we talked about in the previous episode, was actually first proposed all the way back in 1930. And eczema is where a huge amount of the modern evidence has been built for it.
Okay, what does it say? What does the research actually show?
Yeah, so multiple studies have found that infants who go on to develop eczema in their first year of life show lower gut microbiome diversity in early infancy. And it's often with reduced levels of specific beneficial bacteria, including bifidobacterium, Akkermansia, and Faecalibacterium, compared to infants who don't develop it. So this isn't like a smaller single finding. And I've seen this widely in practice. Almost every single patient, especially an infant or kid and even adults, there is a microbiome piece, this dysbiosis that needs to be supported. And it's been replicated across a number of studies now, enough that the gut microbiome differences are really being explored as an early predictive marker for eczema risk.
Is remarkable. It's something in an infant's gut in the first few months could predict a skin condition that's going to come along later. Really makes us think about what we are feeding those infants.
Yeah, what we're feeding those infants, what the mother is eating during that time while she is pregnant. So it really reframes how we think about it. And it's not just an infant story here either. Like there are clinical trials giving probiotic and symbiotic formulas, often lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains, to children with mild to moderate eczema. And they've shown measurable improvements in eczema area, so the amount of area that's affected, as well as the severity index scores, which is like the standard clinical measure that doctors are using to track how bad a flare is.
Yeah, so I think I can guess, but where does reishi specifically fit into the story? Because I know when I take reishi, I know there's a party going on in my gut microbiome.
Reishi's polysaccharides, so these same beta-glucans that are responsible for a lot of the immune modulating effects, they've been described in the research as a promising source of prebiotic activity, meaning they may help feed and support beneficial gut bacterial populations. We've talked about this with all of our functional mushrooms, that they're acting as prebiotic. And that is exciting given that everything we've described about gut bacteria and eczema risk. And it's an area of reishi's research profile that is at an earlier stage compared to like the mast cell and inflammation work. But it is a reasonable piece of the puzzle, and it's not just a stretch. We know that taking functional mushrooms, specifically reishi, significantly impacts people's gut microbiome. And that's why people are taking reishi when they are constipated or they have dysbiosis along with turkey tail, right? We know this. It impacts the gut in a positive, a really beneficial way.
Yeah, I love that we have so many people in our community that started taking reishi for sleep. And then there's this positive side effect of getting this gut microbiome balance that they didn't know that they were missing, because we're all born with native bacteria in our gut, right? There's good bacteria in you when you come into the world. And if we don't feed them, they don't do their job. And mushrooms are feeding them. That's such a simple way to put it, that you don't necessarily have to go out and take a probiotic if you do a really great job of feeding the native bacteria that you came here with, right? Mother Nature doesn't mess it up. You've got building blocks, but are you feeding them what they need in order to grow and thrive? So the full picture really then is antihistamine and anti-inflammatory action locally, and then stress and sleep support systemically, and a possible supporting role in the gut environment that we now know is tied to eczema risk. Like it's a full picture.
Yeah, that's the complete honest picture with how reishi is supporting people with eczema. And again, talking to one more piece that really matters, along with the biology and physiology that we've talked about here, is the extraction method, because we want to make sure that you're getting the triterpenes so that it can impact the mechanisms by which reishi, supports individuals with eczema. You want to make sure that it is dual extract, because the triterpenes, these ganoderic acids that are unique to reishi, are alcohol soluble if they're not water soluble. It needs to be a dual extract with both of them. So it won't capture the triterpenes present in the fruiting body of reishi if it's not a dual extract.
Yeah, quality matters. This is why we started a company, because you can read all that research, you can listen to all the podcasts, you can do all your own work, or be told by, a great friend or neighbor or family member, reishi helped me. But if you're not taking reishi that is in line with the research, a dual extract, so that we are not leaving medicine on the table, if we're not taking enough of it, so the dose has to be in line with what we see is actually beneficial, then you'll be one of those many people out there that says, I tried it, it doesn't work. Well, the fact is, it's not that it doesn't work, it's what are we taking? And unfortunately, there is just too much choice of stuff that is marketing instead of actually being science. And yeah, that's why we started the company. So it's exactly why our reishi extract is a 15-to-1 dual extract, super concentrated dual extract. It's USDA organic certified. We use the whole fruiting body only rather than just mycelium grown on grain. It's the exact same principle as our chaga, right? That we talked about in the previous episode with psoriasis, but it's applied to a completely different mushroom with a completely different job to do. It's fascinating to me.
And consistency and approach is such an important piece to remember as well.
Yeah. So if someone is listening and this is resonating, what do you want them to actually do? What's the action?
Yeah, there's a few concrete things. The first is you want to map your own triggers. Keeping a simple log for a few weeks and being detailed about it is going to be important for you when you're looking for patterns like the soaps you're using, the fabrics, the stress, weather even. Second is protecting the skin barrier directly. That was a big piece for me. And that means gentle, fragrance-free products and consistent moisturizing. You need to make sure that your skin barrier is protected. And it's that whole battlefield really in this condition. Third, if you're curious about reishi, treat it like a daily practice. It's not a rescue remedy during a flare. That's the biggest thing with individuals who are struggling with skin conditions, not just eczema, but also psoriasis and other ones. You can't just be reactive to a flare. It's managing and what are your habitual patterns. So if you are wanting to take reishi to support eczema specifically, it's not this rescue remedy during a flare because it has antihistamine and anti-inflammatory effects that we discussed, but that's built with consistent use rather than acting instantly.
Yeah. And if someone's comparing reishi products specifically, what should stop them in their tracks before they go to the cash register?
Yeah, it's the same things as chaga really applied here. Whole fruiting body, not mycelium on grain, because those are diluted with starch. You want a dual extraction, hot water and alcohol both. If it's a dual extracted reishi, you're getting those triterpenes and the polysaccharides, the compounds that we want, the actual medicine, like you said. And we want to make sure that it's verified on the label, and we need to make sure that there's third-party lab testing behind them so you know that there's no bias and what's actually on the label is there. And it's USDA organic certified. Look in the USDA organic certified, the integrity database, and you will find that company.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Those 3 checks would take someone 30 seconds in a store and completely change the way that they walk out of the store, completely change what they walk out with in their hands being something that would actually work. They could take home and put on their counter and feel good about taking.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Okay, and consistency again. So same lesson as the last episode, different mushroom.
It's almost always the lesson, not just with functional mushrooms.
Yeah, so put it on your, I like to sort out my supplements ahead of time. So even our daughter's doing this now, get a sorter so that what are you taking in the morning, what are you taking in the evening. If you got your magnesium, you're taking B vitamins, just put your mushrooms in there with it and then have them where you're going to be. So for me, what am I doing at night before bed? I'm never going to bed without brushing my teeth. So keep those evening supplements right there so that they're not forgotten, because it's the consistency that is going to help you get to the finish line that you're looking for. And that's a wrap on part 2, all about eczema, all about reishi. And the next episode, we're going to close out this skin series with the 3rd episode, and it's going to be all about acne. And you'll have to tune in to find out what mushroom we're talking about there.
Yeah, for sure. You'll have to tune in to see which functional mushrooms come in for supporting acne, maybe a different mechanism, a different story. Maybe there's another mushroom you've already heard of that comes back.
Maybe. And if this episode gave you a new way to understand your own skin or your kid's skin or someone you love, then that's exactly what we are hoping for. So share it with them, and then we will see you in part 3.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here today and for giving us this time with you. We hope that something in the episode landed, whether that's a new perspective, a piece of research that you hadn't heard before, or just a reminder that your health is worth taking seriously. And if someone in your life could benefit from what we talked about today, then please share this episode with them. That is genuinely how we grow. One conversation, one person at a time.
And if you're ready to bring functional mushrooms into your daily routine, we would love to support that. Head to aversiawellness.com and use the code podcast15 at checkout. It is our way of saying thank you for being a part of this community, and it saves you 15% on your order. And if you are not sure where to start, that's okay, because we have a mushroom wellness quiz on our website that will point you in exactly the right direction.
And if you haven't yet left us a rating and a review or subscribed to the podcast or followed us on social media, all of the links for that are in our show notes. And we would so appreciate your support there. It just helps us reach more people who need to hear this work. Thank you so much for sharing this moment with us.
Until next time, be well.